My name is Eleanor Vance. I am 39 years old, and I am standing in the back of a wedding hall in Asheville, North Carolina, watching my brother realize that the speech he is about to give will be the last good moment of his life. He does not know that yet. He is at the front of the room in a charcoal suit, holding a champagne flute, tapping it with a butter knife to call the room to order. 200 guests turn toward him. My parents are at the head table, beaming. My brother Marcus has always been good at this part, the part where everyone looks at him and waits. I am not supposed to be here. That is the first thing you should understand. 3 months ago, Marcus told the entire family I was unstable, that I had threatened him, that it was safer for everyone if I was not invited to his engagement party, his rehearsal dinner, or this, his wedding to a woman named Diane Petrov, who runs a foundation worth $11 million. He built that story the way he built every story about me. Carefully, with evidence, with my own words. Because for 10 years, my brother read my diary, not once, not by accident, methodically, photographing pages, saving them, filing them, waiting. And for 10 years he took the most private things I ever wrote and fed them back to my family, in the worst possible light, at the worst possible time, so that every decision in our family bent the way he needed it to bend. I found that out 14 months ago. I did not scream. I did not call him. I started reading his. Tonight, in a folder on the phone in my coat pocket, I have one secret of his. Just one. It is enough to unravel everything he has spent a decade building. The marriage, the foundation board seat, the careful reputation. He is about to hand me the room. He is about to ask for silence. Before I tell you what happened after Marcus raised that glass, tell me what time it is where you are. Where are you watching from? What's the weather like there tonight? I'm genuinely curious how far this story will travel, because for 10 years I thought I was the only person something like this had ever happened to. I have since learned I was not. So tell me. I'll be reading. And then let me take you back to the beginning. Let me show you how a girl's diary became a weapon, and how the person who weaponized it forgot the first rule of using someone's secrets against them. If you read mine, eventually I will read yours. My brother's name is Marcus Vance, and for most of my life my family treated his ambitions as the family's destiny, and my needs as a line item that could always be cut. He is 4 years older than me. He was the first child, the bright one, the one who skipped a grade and got the scholarship and gave the toast at our grandfather's funeral that made 3 rows of people cry. I was the second child, the quiet one, the one who wrote things down, because saying them out loud in our house never seemed to land anywhere. I started keeping a diary when I was 11. My mother gave it to me. A green cloth journal with a small brass lock that any paperclip could open, though I did not know that then. I wrote in it almost every day for nearly 30 years. Different notebooks, different years, but the same habit. It was the one place I told the truth. I want you to understand what was in those pages, because it matters. It was not scandal. It was a girl writing that she felt invisible. It was a teenager writing that she had kissed a boy named Toby and felt nothing, and wondered if something was wrong with her. It was a college student writing that she had failed an exam and was terrified to tell our father. It was a young woman writing, at 26, that she had taken antidepressants for a year and stopped because she was ashamed. That last one. Remember that one. Here is the pattern I could not see for most of my life. Whenever Marcus needed something from the family, a decision would mysteriously tilt his way, and it would tilt using information I had only ever written down. In 2014, our parents were deciding how to split the cost of helping one of us with a down payment. I had saved carefully. Marcus had not. I remember my mother saying, gently, that perhaps I wasn't in a stable enough place to take on a mortgage. After everything. I had no idea what everything referred to. The help went to Marcus. He bought a condo. I told myself I had misread the room. In 2017, I was offered a job in Seattle. A real one. A step up. A department of my own. At the family dinner where I announced it, my father took me aside and asked, with terrible kindness, whether I was sure I could handle the pressure, given my history. My history. I turned the job down. I stayed close to home. Marcus, that same year, was given my grandfather's old watch. Because Eleanor might lose it, she's had a hard time keeping things together. I had never lost anything in my life except, apparently, the benefit of the doubt. There was a smaller one, in 2018, that I only understood much later. I had started dating a man named Cole, kind, steady, a high school music teacher. The family met him exactly once. Within a month, my mother began making careful comments about how I tended to get attached too fast, how I shouldn't rush into anything given how easily I get overwhelmed. Cole, sensing a coolness he could not name, eventually drifted. I told myself it had not been serious. It had been serious. I had written, in my diary, that I thought I might marry him. I had written that I was scared of being happy because I did not trust it to last. 2 weeks after I wrote that, my mother used the phrase, scared of being happy to me on the phone, as if it were her own observation. I did not catch it then. I catch it now, and it makes my stomach turn. The deepest one came in 2019. My grandmother, before she died, wanted to leave her small lake cabin to me. She told me so herself, holding my hand, in a hospice room that smelled of antiseptic and the lavender lotion she always used. She said the cabin was where I had been happiest as a child, and she wanted me to have a place that was only mine. When the will was read, the cabin had gone to Marcus. The reason given, quietly, by our father. Your grandmother worried about leaving property to someone who'd been so fragile. She didn't want it to be a burden on you. Fragile. There is that word again. A word from my own pages. A word I had written about myself, alone, at night, never said aloud to a living soul. I have done the arithmetic since. Across those years, the family's decisions cost me a down payment I had earned, a career I had wanted, a man I might have loved, and a cabin my grandmother had promised me with her own hand. Each one explained away by a frailty I never actually had. A frailty assembled, line by line, from sentences I wrote to myself in the dark, believing no one would ever read them. I want to introduce you to 2 people now, because they are the only reason I survived what came next. The first is my closest friend, Dr. Raina Okafor, a clinical psychologist I met in a pottery class 8 years ago, who is the most relentlessly honest person I have ever known. The second, who arrives later, is my attorney, Priscilla Hahn, who specializes in privacy and defamation, and who once described my brother, after reading what he had done, as the most organized abuser I have encountered in 19 years of practice. For most of my life, I believed I was simply the weaker sibling, the careless one, the one who needed protecting. I built my whole self-image around being the family's soft spot, and the terrible thing about a story told often enough is that the person it is told about starts telling it too. By the time I was 35, I introduced myself, in my own head, as the one who could not be trusted with much. I declined opportunities before anyone could decline them for me. I had internalized a verdict I did not know had been authored. And then, 14 months ago, my mother had a stroke. A mild one. She recovered. But in the weeks she was in the hospital, the family needed access to old documents, old photos, old everything, and I was sent to clear out the storage unit Marcus had been renting, in both our names since our childhood home was sold. It was assumed I would handle it. It was the kind of task that fell to me precisely because I was considered too fragile for the important decisions, but reliable enough for the boxes. That was where I found the box. That was where everything I thought I knew about my own life turned out to be a story someone else had written. The box was labeled, in Marcus's neat block handwriting, E. Archive. I assumed it was old schoolwork. Photos. I opened it sitting on the concrete floor of the storage unit with my phone flashlight propped against a lamp. Inside were printouts. Hundreds of them. They were photographs of pages from my diary. Every notebook I had ever kept. Pages I had written at 14, at 22, at 31. Photographed, printed, and, this is the part that made my hands go cold, annotated. In the margins, in his handwriting, were notes, dates, names, and next to certain passages, small strategic comments. Next to my entry about stopping my medication, he had written, useful, stability angle. Next to my entry about the failed exam, leverage re Dad's trust. Next to a passage about my grandmother, he had written a single word: timing. I sat on that floor for a long time. I did not cry. I want to be honest about that, because people always expect the crying. I felt something colder than grief. I felt the floor of my own life drop away, because every cruel coincidence of the last decade suddenly had an author. I went through the box page by page, and the annotations told a story of their own. He had organized them, not by date, by usefulness. There was a section he had clipped together and labeled, in that block handwriting, financial decisions, and it held every entry where I had ever doubted myself about money. There was a section labeled Mom, holding everything I had ever written about wanting my mother's approval. Next to one entry, written when I was 19, about feeling like I disappeared when Marcus was in the room, he had written, confirms narrative, hold for inheritance conversation. He had been planning the cabin years before my grandmother died. He had not been guessing. He had been reading. He had been reading me the way a prosecutor reads a file, looking for the line that would land hardest, saving it for the day it would do the most damage. I photographed every page in that box with my own phone before I put it back exactly as I found it. Raina told me to do that, on the phone, in a voice I had never heard her use. Document everything, she said. Touch nothing else. Leave it where it was. She was the first person who believed me before I had finished the sentence. 3 weeks later, while I was still deciding what a person even does with a discovery like this, Marcus escalated, though he had no idea I had found the box. He called a family meeting. My mother was home from the hospital, recovering, fragile in the way that word is actually supposed to mean, and Marcus stood in her living room and laid out, item by item, a plan for managing the family's future. I am going to give it to you, the way he gave it to us, because the specificity is the point. 1. Power of attorney over our mother's affairs should go to him alone, because, and I am quoting him directly, Eleanor has a documented history of instability, and we all know it. 2. The proceeds from eventually selling our mother's house, appraised at $640,000, should be managed through a family trust that he would control as sole trustee. 3. My access to our mother's medical decisions should be limited, because, again, his exact words, we can't have someone who stopped her own psychiatric treatment making life and death calls. 4. And this is the one that told me he had no limits left. He suggested, gently, to the room, that perhaps it was time the family had a frank conversation about whether Eleanor should be involved in major decisions at all, given everything in her past. Everything in my past, every word of which he had read in my own handwriting, and stored in a box labeled with my initial. My father nodded slowly. My mother, who could barely speak, looked at me with an expression I will never forget. Not cruelty, but a kind of resigned sadness. The look of someone who has been told a story so many times, she has stopped checking whether it is true. I said nothing in that room. I drove to Raina's house and I sat at her kitchen table, and I laid out the photographs of the diary pages next to a transcript I had typed of everything Marcus had just proposed, and Raina, looking between them, said the sentence that organized the rest of my life. Eleanor, he's not using your secrets to hurt you. He's using them to take everything. The hurt is just the delivery system. The next morning I called Priscilla Hahn. She spent 4 hours reading. Then she set the folder down and looked at the door for a moment before she spoke. This is not a family dispute, she said. Surreptitious reproduction of private writings, used to defame and to interfere with your relationships and your mother's estate planning. We have a defamation case. We may have a tortious interference case, and depending on how he accessed some of this, we may have more. She asked me a question then that I had never been asked. Eleanor, in all these years, did anyone ever check? Did anyone ever come to you and ask whether the things being said about you were true? I thought about it. 20 years. 4 major decisions. Not once. The story had been so consistent, so well sourced with my own words, that no one had ever felt the need to verify it. That was the genius of it. He had not lied about me. He had quoted me, out of context, into a different person entirely. I asked her what she recommended. She asked me what I wanted. That was the moment everything changed, because for the first time in my life, Someone asked me what I wanted before they decided what I could handle. I told her I did not want to destroy my brother. I wanted to make it impossible for him to keep using my words while keeping his own buried. I wanted symmetry. I wanted the room to finally look at the right person. And to get that, I would need something of his. One thing, documented the way he had documented me. I had no idea, yet, that he had handed it to me years ago. I stopped reacting. I started building. Priscilla gave me 3 rules. Gather only what was lawfully mine to gather. Keep a chain of custody on every document. Say nothing to Marcus that I did not want read aloud in a deposition. I followed all 3. First, I authenticated the diary pages. I still had the original notebooks. He had only photographed them. I matched my handwriting, the ink, the dated entries. Priscilla had a forensic document examiner confirm that the printouts in the box were reproductions of my originals. That destroyed any claim that I had fabricated them. Second, I requested my own medical records and wrote a sworn statement about my history. On my terms, in my words. I refused to let the most private year of my life keep living in his margins as stability angle. I dragged it into the light myself, where it lost all its power as a weapon. Third, I went looking for what Marcus had buried, and here is where his own method betrayed him. A man who photographs his sister's diary for 10 years is a man who keeps records. He cannot help it. The same compulsion that built the box against me had built a box of his own. I just had to find where he kept it. I did not have to break a single law to find it. Marcus had made me co-renter on that storage unit when we were teenagers, and never removed my name. The unit was legally half mine. Everything in it was lawfully accessible to me. Priscilla confirmed it in writing before I touched a thing. So I went back, and behind the box labeled E, Archive, there was a second box. This one had no label at all. Inside were Marcus's own records, and the contents told me everything about how his mind worked. He photographed his sister, yes, but he also photographed himself. Every transaction, every email he wanted to remember, every arrangement he wanted to be able to reconstruct later. The man could not let an action exist without a record of it. Control, for him, meant documentation. It was the same instinct that built the box against me, turned inward, and it was about to end him. Among the records was a folder of documents related to the Petrov Foundation, where he was about to take a board seat, and which his fiancée Diane ran. There were emails he had printed. There were 2 sets of figures for the same fundraising program, one set for the board, one set that was real. There was a transfer record moving $84,000 in foundation funds through a consulting entity called Halloway Strategic, a company I looked up that same night and found was registered, in the North Carolina Business Registry, to one Marcus J. Vance. The registration was dated 3 weeks before his engagement. He had built the pipeline before he proposed. My brother had been quietly routing money out of his fiancée's charitable foundation into his own shell company, and, like everything else about him, he had documented it, neatly, in a box, next to the one he kept on me. I sat on that concrete floor for the second time in my life, and I did not feel triumph. I felt the strange, level calm of a person who has finally found the thing that makes the math work. I called Priscilla. She brought in a colleague who handled financial matters and a forensic accountant named Wesley Bryce. Over 6 weeks, they traced the $84,000. It was real. It was provable. And critically, it was not mine to expose recklessly, but it was absolutely mine to place, lawfully, in front of the one person who had a legal right and a personal need to know, Diane Petrov, and the Foundation's board. Marcus pressured me the entire time, though he had no idea what I was building. He sensed only that I had gone quiet, and quiet from me had always meant compliance. He left voicemails. Eleanor, we need you on board with the trust paperwork before Mom's next appointment. Then, days later, softer. I know things have been hard for you. Let me handle the heavy stuff. It's what I'm here for. Then, when I still did not answer, sharper. You're making this difficult, and people are starting to notice. Don't make me explain to everyone why you're being like this. I did not respond emotionally to any of it. I forwarded every message to Priscilla. I labeled them. I logged the dates. He was, without knowing it, building my file the way he had built his file on me, and I was keeping every receipt. I worked fast, and I worked in order. I authenticated. I logged. I froze nothing of his, and took nothing that was not lawfully mine. I had the originals examined. I had the money traced. I had Priscilla prepare the sealed envelope. I drew up a single page of my own, a plain statement, in my own words, of who I actually was, to be ready if anyone ever asked. For the first time, I was the one assembling the record. I made one decision that I want you to sit with. I did not leak it. I did not post it. I did not send an anonymous email. Everything I did with my name on it, through counsel, with documentation, in a way that could survive daylight. Because the difference between Marcus and me was never that he was cruel and I was kind. The difference was that he needed the dark. I no longer did. Let me pause here and ask you something, because I have wondered about it every day since. What would you have done with that second box? I had, in my hands, proof of a crime against the woman my brother was about to marry. I could have done 100 things with it. I could have burned it and walked away clean. I could have used it to force him into silence and kept the truce. Comment what you think I decided before I tell you, and comment what you would have done in my place, because I am not certain, even now, that I chose the way most people would have. Priscilla sent Marcus a formal litigation hold letter, notifying him that he was the subject of a defamation and privacy action and must preserve all relevant documents. It went out on a Tuesday. The wedding was that Saturday. I bought a ticket to the wedding I had been banned from, not to make a scene, to be a witness, present, calm and holding. In my coat pocket, a single sealed envelope that Priscilla had prepared, addressed to the chair of the Petrov Foundation Board, who happened to be a guest. I was not going to say a word. I had learned, finally, that the most devastating thing you can do to a person who built their power on controlling the story is to simply stop being quiet about the truth and let them keep talking. Saturday, the wedding hall in Asheville, 200 guests. My brother, tapping a champagne flute with a butter knife, calling the room to attention. I was at the back. I want to describe where I actually was, because it matters. I was standing near a tall window, and outside the light was that long gold of early evening, and a string quartet had just finished tuning, and the whole room smelled of peonies. It was beautiful. I was completely calm. The chaos that was coming was not going to come from me. Marcus began his speech. He thanked the guests. He thanked Diane. He talked about family, about loyalty, about the importance of protecting the people you love from the people who would tear them down. He looked, briefly, toward the back of the room, toward me. A small, private warning. He had seen me come in. He thought he understood what I was there to do. He thought I was there to make a scene, to prove him right, to be the unstable sister disrupting his perfect day. He had spent 10 years writing that character for me. He could not imagine I would refuse to play her. So I did the one thing he was not prepared for. I smiled at him, and I sat down, and I folded my hands. What he did not know was that 20 minutes earlier, in the foyer, I had handed Priscilla's sealed envelope to a silver-haired woman named Margaret Lindquist, the chair of the Petrov Foundation Board, with a single quiet sentence. I think you should read this before the toast. That was all. I did not stay to watch her open it. I walked into the hall and sat down. Margaret Lindquist read it during the speech. I watched her face from across the room. I watched her read the transfer record, the registration for Halloway Strategic, the 2 sets of figures. I watched her look up, slowly, and find Diane Petrov at the head table. And I watched something pass between 2 women who had run a foundation together for 9 years. A question, and then an answer. Marcus was still talking. He had reached the part about trust. Diane stood up. Not dramatically. She simply stood, and she walked to Margaret, and she read the page over her shoulder, and the color left her face the way water leaves a glass that has cracked. Marcus saw her stand. He faltered. He asked, into the microphone, with a small laugh, if everything was all right. And here is where my brother made the one mistake that ended it. A different man might have said nothing, might have walked over quietly, asked what was wrong, contained it. Marcus, who had spent his whole life controlling the room, could not bear a room he did not control. So he did the worst possible thing. He kept the microphone, and he turned the attention back to himself. And into a hall that had gone strangely quiet, he said, with that practiced charming exasperation, "I'm sorry, everyone. My sister has a history of this. I did warn Diane there might be a scene." He blamed me. In front of 200 people, on instinct, he reached for the same weapon he had used for a decade, and pointed it at me, in public, with a microphone, while the actual evidence of his actual crime sat in the chairwoman's hands. Diane took the microphone out of his hand. She did not raise her voice. She said, "Marcus, what is Holloway Strategic?" He did not answer. His face went white. The man who always had the next line did not have one. And then he did the thing the spec of his entire personality demanded. He tried to take control of the narrative one more time. "Diane, that's a consulting arrangement. It's completely standard. I can explain every dollar of it." But he was explaining a thing no one had accused him of yet. He had heard the company name and immediately defended the money. And 200 people watched a man answer a charge before it had been made. Margaret Lindquist said, very quietly, "I didn't mention any money, Marcus." That was the second mistake, and it was worse than the first. The room did not erupt. That is not how these things actually go. The room went quiet. In a way I have never heard a room go quiet. 200 people understanding, all at once, that they were watching something true happen. Margaret Lindquist stood and asked the guests, calmly, to give the family a moment. People filed out, slowly, in that stunned half-silence, glancing back. I stayed in my seat by the window in the gold evening light, and I watched my brother stand alone at the front of a room he had spent his whole life trying to command, with nothing left to say. He found me afterward, in the emptying hall. He was shaking. "What did you do?" he said. Not a question, an accusation. The same one he had been making about me, in margins, for 10 years. For a moment I saw the whole arc of it. The down payment, the Seattle job, Cole drifting away, the cabin, the watch, 20 years of being quietly rewritten into someone smaller than I was. And I saw that he was waiting, even now, for me to come apart, to prove the character he had cast. He needed me to scream so that the room could become, retroactively, a story about his unstable sister rather than his own crime. I told him the truth, quietly, so only he could hear it. "I read your diary, Marcus." He understood. I watched him understand. Everything he had built on the assumption that he was the only one keeping records, gone, in the time it took a chairwoman to read 3 pages. I picked up my coat and I left. Outside, the air was cool, and the light was nearly gone, and for the first time in my adult life, I was not carrying anyone's story but my own. The wedding did not happen. Diane Petrov called it off that night. Over the following months, the consequences arrived with the same specificity Marcus had once used against me. The Petrov Foundation's board commissioned a full audit. The $84,000 was confirmed and traced. Marcus repaid it under a settlement agreement to avoid criminal referral, resigned any claim to the board seat, and signed a non-disparagement clause that, with a kind of symmetry I did not design but did appreciate, legally bars him from ever again characterizing me to others. My own case settled too. Marcus agreed, in writing, to destroy every reproduction of my diary, to a permanent injunction against contacting members of our family about my medical or personal history, and to a statement of correction sent to my parents, drafted by his own lawyer, acknowledging that the characterizations of me he had spread for years were false and were based on private writings he had taken without my knowledge. My father read that letter twice. He called me. He did not fully apologize. I want to be honest about that, because real life does not wrap up cleanly. He said, "I think I believed it, because believing it was easier than the alternative." The alternative being that the fragile child had been the strong one, and the family's golden son had been quietly poisoning the well for a decade. We are speaking again, carefully. My mother, recovered now, keeps the green diary I gave her permission to read, all of it, in my own words, on her nightstand. She told me she wishes she had asked to read it 20 years ago. So do I. From the wreckage, I built something. I used the settlement to fund a small private practice with Raina, not therapy. I am not a clinician, but a documentation and advocacy service for people who suspect their own story is being told by someone else. We have helped 41 people in our first year. Most of them, when they arrive, say the same thing I once believed, that they are the weak one, the unstable one, the careless one. Most of them are not. Most of them have simply never been allowed to read their own file. I bought the cabin back too, not from Marcus. He had sold it 2 years earlier to cover a debt I now suspect was Halloway-shaped. I tracked down the family that owned it and made an offer the spring after the wedding. The new owners let me walk through it before they decided. I stood in the small room, with the window facing the water, the room where I had been happiest as a child, the room my grandmother had wanted me to have, and I understood that I was buying back something that had been promised to me and taken with my own words. They accepted my offer in May. I keep the green diary there now, on the windowsill, in the light. Marcus reached out once, 11 months later, a long email, part apology, part explanation, part request. He wanted to find a way back to being a family. I read it twice, the way Margaret read that page, and then I wrote back one line. I forgive you, and I will not be available to you. I have not heard from him since. Forgiveness was for me. Availability was the part he had to earn, and he has not tried to earn it. He has only tried to retrieve it. Here is what I understand now, that I could not see for 30 years. The most dangerous person in your life is not the one who hates you. It is the one who has read you carefully, decided what you are, and spent years making everyone agree, including you. For most of my life, I thought my private writing was the weakness, the soft underbelly, the thing that made me vulnerable to a man like my brother. I have come to believe the opposite. The diary was never the weakness. The silence around it was. I had handed him my words by never speaking them aloud, by writing the truth only in the dark and then living, in daylight, inside whatever he made of it. The moment I was willing to say plainly who I was, to a lawyer, to a chairwoman, to 200 strangers, to you, the words stopped being something that could be used against me. You cannot be blackmailed by a secret you are willing to tell. I never called what I did revenge. I want to say that plainly. I did not destroy my brother. I simply stopped guarding the lie that protected him, and let the truth do what truth does when you finally stop standing in front of it. So tell me honestly, if you found out someone had been reading your most private words for 10 years and using them to shrink your whole life, would you have confronted them in the moment, the way they expected, and given them the scene they'd already cast you in? Or would you have done what I did, stayed quiet, documented everything, and let them hand you the room? Share your honest answer in the comments. Someone reading it may need permission to understand that staying silent about the truth is not the same as keeping the peace. Sometimes it is just protecting the person who broke it. I'll be reading.